Humans are an expressive species, and throughout the history of mankind, the methods through which this expression took shape has evolved substantially. In this documentary, I will examine just one small element of this dynamic facet of human life, the history of paper and the pen. Because these two important communication tools have always been completely bound to one another, and each needed the existence of the other to truly come into being, I will address the history of each concurrently rather than separately. These two man-made items have greatly shaped the development and use of written language for purposes that range from legal documents, personal diaries, works of fiction, and historical accounts that serve as a means of recording our past. Prior to the invention of the material that we today call paper, there were a number of surfaces upon which writing was carried out. In Mesopotamia, around the year 3000 BC, clay tablets were one of the earliest surfaces used by humans to record drawings, pictographs, and early forms of writing. Due to the delicate clay surface of these tablets, a writing implement such as a squared-off reed was used, as it would enable scribes to leave clear markings without crumbling the clay. As writing became more prevalent in societies, there came a need to develop a writing surface that was smaller in size, which in turn also made it more convenient and transportable. Roman scribes that were writing information that was of a temporary nature used wooden tablets filled with wax that could be written in and then erased or smoothed out to be reused again and again. The tool used for writing upon these waxed surfaces was characterized by its long and thin pen-like shaft, which came to a point on one end and a broad flat area on the other end, which served as an eraser of sorts, as it was used to smooth out the waxed surface when the writing was no longer needed. Although many paper historians do not consider it to be true paper, parchment or vellum was also manufactured in the past as a writing surface. Parchment is a general term for an animal skin which has been prepared for writing and printing. As these substances are not considered to be examples of true paper, they will not be discussed any further than what has just been mentioned. One of the earliest writing materials in human history was papyrus. The ancient Egyptians invented papyrus around 3100 BC. This writing surface soon grew in popularity in other areas of the world and eventually became the dominant writing surface for a period of 4,000 years. This substance was made from thin sections of reeds taken from the papyrus plant. The inside of the plant stalks was cut and then peeled into thin strips which were laid out in two layers. The first layer was laid horizontally, while the second layer was laid on top of the first vertically. These two layers were then pressed and dried to create sheets of papyrus. No glue was required to hold the two layers together due to the natural gum of the plant. Lastly, the papyrus was stretched and smoothed to create a usable writing surface. Interestingly, it was one of the weaknesses of this writing surface that led to early writing being done upon long rolls of papyrus called scrolls, rather than the folded, cut, and bound pages of the codex. Papyrus became brittle after it dried out, and rolling the papyrus instead of folding it was the best procedure to extend the life of the material. Scrolls were often as long as 4.5 meters in length, and were generally only written on one side. Some of the earliest writing tools used on papyrus, like the writing surface itself, were also made from reeds. A reed pen consisted of a length of reed cut to a point on one end. A slit was made in the reed to accommodate for the movement of ink within the reed to the tip. Squeezing the reed forced the ink into the tip, which acted like a nib. Like any commodity, supply and demand for the material directly related to the cost of papyrus. As it was grown mainly in Egypt and was exported from that region of the world in the 7th century, other nations were exploring with materials that would serve as an alternative to the less available and more costly papyrus. Although it has since been largely replaced by paper, the invention of papyrus has contributed tremendously to our knowledge of the ancient world. The invention and widespread use of papyrus paved the way for ground paper, which in turn led to the invention of modern paper. Ground paper is credited as being the predecessor of what we know today as paper. It was in China in the year 105 AD that paper was invented by an official of the imperial court. Vegetable fiber was beaten and macerated until it could be used to form a thin, flat layer in a porous mold. The vegetable fiber source varied from substances such as tree bark, hemp, and China grass. Wanting to maintain its monopoly in the production of paper, the paper-making process was a closely guarded secret in China, and it was a military defeat that actually led to the spread of paper-making technology. In 751 AD, the Chinese lost a battle in Turkestan. It was after this defeat that the paper-making process spread from China to areas in the Middle East, and by the end of the 10th century, paper had replaced the use of both parchment and papyrus in the Arab world. In these areas of the world, paper was also made from a variety of materials. Although the overall paper-making process was quite similar, depending on the region of the world and the available materials therein, paper was comprised of fibers taken from flax, linen, cotton, and other recycled rags that were added into the pulp base for paper. Some of the earliest paper for this reason was often called cloth parchment. As with any change in society, paper had its proponents and its critics. Paper was more costly than previously used materials such as vellum, and it was more fragile than papyrus. It was also initially associated with Jews and Arabs, who were not trusted by some nations. In Western Europe, the Church initially banned the use of paper, calling it a pagan art, touting parchment as the only material holy enough for the sacred word. It was actually the rise of print in the 15th century that eventually created an increased demand for paper and ultimately resulted in the greater acceptance of paper by a large number of people. The increased demand for paper, coupled with the invention of steam-driven paper-making machines in the 19th century, which were capable of making paper fiber from wood pulp, brought down the cost of paper substantially, no longer making it a luxury item. As papyrus and paper became more widespread, the people who were using the writing services was changing too. Much of the early use of the paper and pen were for practical and business-related purposes. Many artifacts indicate that record-keeping was one of the earliest reasons for the rise of written documents. The historical study of paper reveals that it was originally used predominantly for official documents such as deeds, contracts, national registers, and charters. Some historians speculate that the invention of paper was the key element in global cultural advancement. As the demand for paper was on the rise, so too was the demand for a writing tool that better suited the needs of the writer. Early pens were essentially hollow tubes of material that needed to be dipped into ink frequently to maintain a suitable amount of ink on the tip in order to facilitate writing. The writing instrument that dominated for the longest period of time was the quill pen. This pen was introduced around 700 AD and was made of a feather, most commonly that of a goose. One of the disadvantages of these pens was that they lasted for only a few weeks before needing to be replaced. Using pens such as this was a slow process and required preparation. With the invention of paper, which was a writing surface that allowed for speedier discourse, there became an even greater need for changes in the available writing tools. Facilitated by better paper and inks, handwriting developed into an art form and was becoming an everyday occurrence in societies, further necessitating better tools to perform the task of writing. The invention of a pen that had a refillable reservoir was therefore a very significant event. The earliest of these types of pens was invented in 1702 and was called a fountain pen. These early attempts to create a refillable pen were often problematic. Many early designs were impractical, did not work consistently, and often resulted in messy spills and inconsistent ink flow. The ink often took too long to dry and was smeared as the writer continued on down the page, and the action needed to refill the ink cartridge was cumbersome. The first efforts to create a ballpoint pen were made in 1888. The result was a product that was essentially a failure, partly because, in order for the pen to function properly, it required an ink of just the right consistency to flow smoothly through the pen without leaking or letting out an inconsistent supply of ink into the tip. Although the idea was a remarkable one, the ballpoint pen did not catch on at this time. In 1938, Laszlo Biro came up with an improved version of the ballpoint pen. Although his invention was moderately successful, there were problems with Biro's design, and it was not until the Bic pen was created in the late 1950s that we really saw a ballpoint pen manufacturer dominating the market. Due to the fact that paper was being transformed by the newfound wood-based source materials and mechanization, it became a much cheaper product which had far-reaching implications in industrialized society as a whole in the 19th century. The book and newspaper were previously luxury items for the wealthy, and illiteracy was the norm among the commoners. As paper became cheaper and print became more commonplace, school books, works of fiction and nonfiction, and newspapers eventually became available to all members of society. This also gave rise to personal writing in a way that had not previously been available to anyone but the privileged, as the average person was now able to purchase paper and writing tools that allowed them to keep a diary or write personal letters. Over the course of history, writing has been shaped by the tools that we have used to express ourselves via this medium. Society's intentions, purposes, and motivation to incorporate writing into so many aspects of our lives has in turn shaped the tools that we use to express ourselves on paper.